Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. There's a story that's told about Bodhidharma, the Indian who went to China and founded Chan. A number of variations of this story, but one way of telling it goes like this, that Bodhidharma went to see the emperor, or the emperor summoned him actually, and he went to see the emperor and to discourse on Dhamma. And the emperor told him, I've dedicated so much land to the support of the Sangha, and I've built this many temples, and I've done this and that, and how much merit have I made? Bodhidharma said, no merit. What do you mean, no merit? And he raised one finger in the air and said, vastness. And the emperor couldn't understand what he meant by that. So it says, in reply to the emperor's question, without a word, he strode from the hall and sat outside facing the wall for 9 years. A lot of extreme stories told about Bodhidharma. This concept of vastness is important. It's a key to developing our practice, developing a samatha, developing meditation, is vastness of the mind, expansiveness, openness. One of the ways it's expressed in the Pali is boundless, anantara, without limit, boundless. In Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about developing big mind, whereas little mind, your mind is concerned with yourself and your personal problems, and you don't go out beyond the limits of your sensory experience. But big mind is relating your mind to the entire cosmos, opening your mind to the cosmos. So, for example, one of the practices they do in Tibetan Buddhism is the heart mandala, where they twine their fingers into a model of the world system and dedicate it to liberation of all sentient beings. And this is something also that they emphasize, is that the practice is not for personal liberation, but for the liberation of all sentient beings. And they'll do that dedication before beginning a practice. May this merit of this go for all sentient beings. So all these different ways of expressing it, the underlying idea is a mind without limits, without boundaries. You know, boundaries are an artificial wall that we create as part of identifying to a self, is you have a boundary between self and other. And the breaking down of that boundary, you open the mind to vastness. And I think that having contemplations in this regard is important for the development of meditation. I think where many meditators go wrong is that instead of cultivating the vastness of mind, they cultivate a narrowness of mind, a rigidity, a forced kind of practice. So another concept besides vastness, parallel to it, is naturalness. There's the Zen koan, what was your original face before you were born? There's a natural state of mind without complications, just the primordial mind. Now, our existence in this life as a human being with this particular history and these particular associations and this particular knowledge and so on is contingent. It's a result of karma. It's not intrinsic to the essence of the citta, of the knowing mind. It's superfluous to it. The citta mind predates this particular existence, and it will re-arise in future existences. This particular set of circumstances is contingent and temporary. So when we develop a samatha meditation like anapanasati, the idea is to keep the mind still and let the object fill the mind. Not to put the mind onto the object, not to force an attention, a concentration, a focus. That's going to be very quickly exhausting, and it also limits the mind, constricts the mind. Whereas if the mind is held in a state of naturalness and a state of vastness, open and receptive, and allow the object to fill the mind, you can think of the breath as like the waves of the ocean, tides going in and out and filling this vast space, this boundless space, this infinite space of the mind. Sankharas that arise in the mind, the thoughts and memories and daydreams and concerns and whatnot, they're contingent, they're temporary, they're not substantial, and they're not innate, they're not natural to the mind. They're like the froth on the surface of the sea. We can't force the mind to be still, but you can learn the knack of non-attention, of not getting engaged with the ephemeral phenomena, with the sankharas, not engaging with them, seeing them as empty, seeing them without substance, impermanent, without importance, not intrinsic to the nature of mind, but contingent upon it, ephemeral, transient. The stilling of formations is innately experienced as blissful. The mind becomes very peaceful. And this is a movement towards a more natural state of mind. This is something else where I think that many people go wrong in their thinking. They imagine states of deep samadhi, states of jhana are somehow exalted esoteric states that are something strange to the mind that has to be developed artificially, whereas actually they're very deeply innate to the mind. They're natural states that will flow forth when the sankharas are stilled. As there's a movement away from engagement with the senses, first of all, even before sankharas, engagement with the senses locks us into the kama bhumi, the consciousness level of sense experience. So we try and disengage from attention or interest in the senses. So when you're trying to develop deep meditation, as long as you're allowing yourself to fuss about the comfort of the body, for example, then you're not going to go very far. You know, as long as you don't put the body aside. Now this is pretty well universal phenomena that beginning meditators have a lot of pain in the body. And this comes from, mostly it comes from being still, physically still, for a prolonged period for the first time in their life. And they're not giving themselves permission to fidget away from every little discomfort. So the dukkha that's inherent in the body becomes obvious and manifest. It isn't fidgeted away from. Because the body is inherently full of dukkha. It's a conditioned phenomena. It's bound within the laws of samsara. It's going to have suffering. It's going to have dukkha. There's no way it doesn't. There's some skillful means you can use to limit the physical pain in the body, diminish it in terms of posture and stretching and so on. But in the end, you really only get past that problem when you no longer let it matter. When the mind transcends concern over the comfort of the body. And then there's a release from that. Disengagement from the senses is also very important for development in a retreat situation, for example. Not even a formal retreat necessarily, but even if you're doing some, prolonged period of meditation during the day, the quality of indriya samvara, sense restraint, is the first prerequisite for progress, is not going out through the senses. That's why I've always found it a bit strange and silly, these New Age kind of meditation tapes where you listen to whale sounds and things. You're just getting more engaged in the senses. It's traditional from the beginning that in Buddhism that when you're in seclusion, when you're doing a retreat, you take the 8 precepts. And the reason for the 8 precepts is to develop indriya samvara, sense restraint. Now, the 5 precepts are ethical, moral precepts. But the additional ones that come with the 8 have nothing to do with morality. They're to do with sense restraint. You're closing off avenues of diversion. Make it easier to practice sense restraint. This is also could be expressed in terms of the 3 vivekas. Viveka means seclusion. The first viveka is kaya viveka, is bodily seclusion. Just if you go to an empty hut, or you go to a quiet room in your house and turn off the light and sit on a cushion, that's immediately practicing kaya viveka, bodily seclusion. It's the first step. Then there's a citta viveka, which is seclusion of the mind. And this is what comes after sense restraint. Then you restrain the mind, which doesn't mean forcibly restraining the mind. That's very important. You're not holding it down, pressing it down, constricting it, keeping it on a leash. You're making it quiet. You're letting the formations settle out and dissipate. It's not a question of suppressing the formations, but of not engaging in them, not believing in them or taking an interest in them, letting them settle and dissipate by not feeding them interest and energy. And when the noise, first of all of sense impression and then of thought formation, are stilled, then the underlying strata of the mind becomes more and more evident. The natural, clear knowing. So samadhi is a critical quality here. It's the eighth path factor. So it's given the ultimate place in the Eightfold Path. It's defined as stillness or stability of the mind. The mind is not wavering or moving. It's resting in its natural place. And then with the deepening of samadhi, the mind merges into what is defined as first jhana, which still has vitakka vichara. So there is some thought formation present. Vitakka is the striking of the object, and vichara is the holding of the object. There's piti and sukha, that is rapture and bliss, usual translations. Piti is the kind of energizing factor in the body. I think if it's not exactly the same, it's closely related to the idea in other systems of like kundalini or chi energy. It's when the resistance is gone, it's natural flow. All these are natural states that just occur when you take the brakes off, when you stop suppressing them or hiding them with thought formation and sense engagement. And sukha is bliss, is the oceanic feeling, the feeling of content and well-being. And ekaggata, the fifth factor, is the unity of mind. This is the perfection of samadhi, when the mind is completely still and unified on a single object. There's no wavering. It's like the rock of Gibraltar. It's completely steady. And as you progress through the jhanas, it's always a progression towards the more natural, the more open, the more vast, but also more simple, uncluttered, pure, pristine, primordial kind of state of mind, ultimately natural state of mind. The next thing to drop away is the thought formation, vitakka vichara. The mind is so stable on the object, it doesn't require vitakka vichara anymore, and they drop away. And with the falling away of vitakka vichara and therefore of thought formation, piti is unleashed. It's experienced fully. But then piti has an energetic quality that's, as the mind gets more subtle, that's felt as disturbing. And the mind rests in sukha, that's third jhana. And finally, even that bliss state seems coarse, and the mind settles into the state of equanimity, in fourth jhana. There's a feeling as you go deeper into these states, there's a feeling not of discovering something new, but of remembering something forgotten, and of returning to a more natural state of being. Now, this is your face before you were born. The cosmological expression of this is that in the myth in the Aganya Sutta, human beings originated with the fall of Abhasara Brahmas, which is the equivalent consciousness to second jhana, that those beings basically fell to earth by becoming engaged in sense experience, tasting the foam on the sea. They fell to earth and became ensnared in coarse matter. So in that sense, we're coming from that, our more primordial state, and we take in the course of evolution or devolution in samsara, we're taking on more complications. As you move away from the source, as you move outwards, then things become more complicated, more labyrinthine, more twisted, adding more layers of complications and stuff. And the whole project of the meditation is peeling that away, returning to a more natural state of being. So there's a kind of a paradox that comes up in terms of right effort and striving. The Buddha praised energy and effort, and he said the path is for the energetic, not for the lazy. And the effort must be put in, but that effort has to be the right kind. It has to be balanced and towards vastness and boundlessness and peacefulness, not a strained striving. And there comes a perfection in the meditation, the feeling of a diligent effortlessness, it's been called. Diligent effortlessness. Another name that another teacher uses is undistracted non-meditation. You get to the point where the meditation is flawless in that you're completely unified, and the mind is completely clear, but there's no sense of trying or effort or striving. You're just being rather than doing. So another point related to this that is worth contemplating is the perfect meditation. The highest form of meditation is doing nothing. Just being, doing nothing. But because that's so extremely difficult for beings caught up in samsaric existence, that you're given minimalist exercises like watch the breath, to kind of approach that idea of pure nothingness. So to kind of sum up, make an end of this, the main points is to strive for boundlessness, clarity, non-complication, non-engagement in phenomena, and to regard it as a movement towards a naturalness and an openness, a freeing of the mind from the bounds and snares of the sense desire level. In conclusion, the fully liberated mind is described as radiant, boundless, and finds no footing anywhere.
Sadhu, 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 animodanami.